The coldest thing I ever felt wasn't the Canadian winter wind cutting through my coat. It was the steel handcuffs clicking shut around my 70-year-old wrists while my own son stood 10 feet away, laughing like he'd just won the lottery. That metallic snap echoed through the courtroom, but it couldn't drown out Ethan's voice as he turned to his wife and said loud enough for me to hear, "3 years behind bars, sweetheart. Every last penny is ours now. I am from Brampton. Where are you watching from? Because what happened to me next is something that could happen to any mother, any grandmother, anywhere in this world, and I need you to hear this story to its very end. Let me take you back to where it all started to unravel, because nothing this evil happens overnight. It grows slowly, like black mold behind walls you can't see, until the whole structure is rotting from within. My name is Cecilia Dawson, though by the time this tale reaches its end, that name will have changed in ways I never imagined possible. 70 years on this earth teaches you a thing or two about reading people, or so I thought. Turns out even a mother's instinct can be fooled when greed wears the mask of family love. The judge's gavel came down hard that morning, sentencing me to 3 years in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. Financial fraud, they called it, embezzlement. The words tasted like poison in my mouth as the prosecutor read them aloud, each syllable another nail in my coffin. The evidence against me was overwhelming: bank statements showing mysterious transfers, forged signatures on documents I'd never seen, testimony from an accountant who swore under oath that I'd systematically stolen money from my own son. All lies, every single word of it was manufactured, crafted, designed to destroy me. But the cruelest cut wasn't the false conviction. It was watching Ethan and his wife Brittany celebrate as they led me away. She wore a red dress that day, bright as fresh blood, and diamond earrings that caught the courtroom lights. New earrings, expensive ones, bought with my money, no doubt, already spending the fortune they'd worked so hard to steal. The bailiff gripped my elbow, not roughly but firmly, the way you'd handle someone fragile who might shatter. At 70, I suppose that's what I looked like to him, a frail old woman who'd finally been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. My joints ached as he guided me through the side door, away from the public gallery, where strangers had watched my humiliation with the morbid fascination people reserve for car accidents and house fires. The processing hallway smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation, that particular scent of fear and disinfectant you find in places where hope goes to die. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn for comfort during the long trial, squeaked against the yellowed linoleum. Other prisoners passed us going the opposite direction, some with tears streaming down their faces, others wearing that hollow thousand-yard stare of people who'd already given up. But I hadn't given up, not by a long shot. They brought me to a small waiting room with cream-colored walls that were peeling at the corners, revealing layers of old paint underneath like geological strata of institutional neglect. Plastic chairs were bolted to the floor in rows, and behind a metal desk sat a correctional officer who looked almost as old and worn down as I felt. Officer Frank Miller, according to his name badge. He had the kind of face that told stories without words, deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth, hands scarred and calloused from decades of hard work, a uniform pressed so carefully it spoke of a man clinging to dignity in a place where dignity was a rare commodity. His eyes met mine, and I saw something unexpected there. Not cruelty or indifference, but a bone-deep weariness mixed with something that might have been kindness. The escorting officer exchanged paperwork with Frank, their conversation a murmur of bureaucratic procedure I'd heard variations of 100 times during this nightmare. Then he left, and that heavy door clicked shut with a finality that made my heart skip. I was alone with Frank Miller, and this was my only chance. My hands were still cuffed in front of me, the metal warm now from my body heat but still carrying that underlying chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I lowered myself carefully into one of those plastic chairs, feeling every one of my 70 years in my knees and hips. Frank opened my file and began reading, occasionally making notes in a spiral-bound notebook that looked like it had survived several decades of service. This was the moment. This was when everything would either fall into place or collapse completely. While Frank's attention was focused on the paperwork, I moved my hands slowly, deliberately, reaching into the inner pocket of my tweed jacket. I'd worn that jacket throughout the entire trial. It was old, unremarkable, the kind of thing elderly women wear because it's comfortable and has deep pockets. Nobody pays attention to old women in sensible clothing. We become invisible, which can be either a curse or a blessing depending on what you need to hide. My fingers found the paper I'd prepared the night before in my holding cell, folded into a small, tight square. I'd written it by the dim light that never quite goes out in those places, using a pencil I'd convinced a guard to lend me by claiming I needed to write a letter to my son. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. I pulled the note out millimeter by millimeter, making sure the movement didn't draw Frank's attention. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel my pulse in my temples, behind my eyes, in my fingertips. If this didn't work, I had no backup plan. This was everything. The paper felt insignificant between my trembling fingers, but what was written on it held the power to change everything. Frank closed my file and leaned back in his chair, which protested with a long squeak. He sighed, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 processed prisoners, 1,000 ruined lives passing through his hands like water through a sieve. "Transport will be here in about 20 minutes, Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice rougher than I'd expected but not unkind. "Do you need anything? Water, restroom?" "Water would be good," I managed to say, my throat suddenly dry as desert sand. He nodded and pushed himself up from his chair with the careful movements of a man whose joints protest every change in position. I recognized that dance. We were probably around the same age, both of us too old to be comfortable but too stubborn to stop working. He walked to a corner table where a plastic pitcher sat sweating condensation, his back turned to me. This was it, my moment. I slid the folded note onto his desk, positioning it right next to my file folder where he couldn't miss it when he returned. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly knocked over a pen holder, but I managed to place it just right, conspicuous enough to be noticed, subtle enough to look like it might have been there all along. Frank came back with a paper cup filled with lukewarm water that tasted of plastic and chemicals. I took it with both hands, the handcuffs clinking, and drank slowly even though every instinct screamed at me to gulp it down. I needed to appear calm, composed, like a woman who'd accepted her fate. He settled back into his chair, and I watched his eyes scan across the desk, doing that automatic inventory people do when they return to their workspace. I saw the exact moment he registered the note. His gaze snagged on it, his eyebrows drew together in confusion. He picked it up slowly, turning it over in his large, weathered hands like it might be a trick, a trap, something dangerous. Then he unfolded it. I kept drinking my water, but I was watching him over the rim of that cheap paper cup, cataloging every micro-expression that crossed his face. Confusion first, then his eyes widening, his mouth forming a small O of shock, his face paling beneath his tan. The note read, "My son does not know who my new husband is. Call Robert Sterling at this number. Tell him his wife has been arrested. In exchange for this help, you will receive a home and a new life for your family." Below that, I'd written a phone number in careful, clear digits. Frank's hands started trembling. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw disbelief warring with desperate hope. "Robert Sterling," he whispered, his voice cracking on the name. "The Robert Sterling?" I nodded once, holding his gaze steadily, letting him see the truth in my eyes. The color drained completely from Frank's face. He knew that name. Everyone in our state knew that name. Robert Sterling was more than just a successful businessman. He was a force of nature, an empire unto himself. Construction, real estate, urban development, investments that moved more money in a day than most people saw in a lifetime. He had connections that reached into the highest levels of government, influence that could open doors most people didn't even know existed. And he was my husband. Frank looked at the note again, then back at me, struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. A convicted criminal, a 70-year-old woman in handcuffs, claiming to be married to one of the most powerful men in the country. "Ma'am," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "If this is some kind of, it's true," I interrupted gently but firmly. "Every word of it. I married Robert 6 months ago in a private ceremony. My son doesn't know because we kept it secret for security reasons. Robert has enemies, people who would use anyone close to him as leverage. We planned to go public once he'd arranged proper protection for me, but then this happened." I gestured at my handcuffs, at the processing room, at the entire nightmare my life had become. "Ethan and his wife saw an opportunity in a lonely old widow. They never imagined I had someone powerful enough to protect me." Frank stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him working through it, trying to decide if I was telling the truth or if this was the desperate delusion of a broken woman. "I have a daughter," he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "Olivia, she's 26 with 2 little ones. Her husband left them last year, just disappeared one day without a word. She lives with me and my wife in a 2-bedroom apartment that's barely big enough for the 4 of us. The kids sleep in the living room." His eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill over. "My wife has rheumatoid arthritis, needs medication that costs more than our insurance covers. I work double shifts just to keep us afloat, and I'm one bad knee away from not being able to do this job anymore." He pulled the note from his pocket and looked at it again, like he was afraid it might have changed, that the words might have rearranged themselves into something less miraculous. "If you're telling me the truth," he said carefully, "if there's even a chance this is real, I'll make that call, because my family needs a miracle just as much as you do." "Make the call," I told him. "And watch what happens." Frank took out his personal cell phone with hands that shook so badly he nearly dropped it. It was an old model with a cracked screen, held together with a case that had seen better days. He dialed the number I'd written, his finger hovering over the call button for just a moment, one last hesitation before he changed both our lives forever. Then he pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath, suddenly terrified that Robert might not answer, that he might be in a meeting or on another call or somewhere his phone was off. 4 rings, 5. Frank looked at me with growing worry, like maybe this was all a cruel joke after all. Then the line connected. Sterling, Robert's voice came through, crisp and professional, the tone he used when he didn't recognize a number and was prepared to dismiss a sales call. Frank nearly dropped the phone. He cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. Mr. Sterling, my name is Frank Miller. I'm a correctional officer at the County Justice Center. I'm calling because— He paused, looked at me for confirmation. I nodded. Because your wife asked me to contact you. The silence on the other end was absolute. For a heartbeat, I thought the call had dropped. Then Robert's voice came through again, completely transformed. The professional veneer was gone, replaced by raw fear and urgency. Cecilia, he said, and just hearing him say my name made tears spring to my eyes. What happened to Cecilia? Where is she? Why wasn't I notified? She's here with me now, sir. She was arrested and convicted. They sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison. She gave me this number and told me to call you. She says you're her husband. Convicted, the word came out like a gunshot. Convicted of what? When did this happen? Why the hell didn't anyone contact me? Frank held the phone toward me, and I took it with my cuffed hands, the chains jingling softly. Robert, I said, and my voice broke on his name. All the strength I'd been maintaining, all the composure I'd forced myself to keep, crumbled in that moment. Robert, I'm so sorry. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Cecilia, my God, his voice was ragged with emotion. Tell me what's happening. Tell me everything. Ethan, I said, and speaking my son's name felt like swallowing glass. He accused me of fraud. He forged documents, bought false testimony, created an entire case against me. They convicted me this morning. 3 years, Robert. They gave me 3 years. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't confusion or shock. It was the quiet before a storm, the deadly calm that precedes absolute devastation. When Robert spoke again, his voice was controlled, but I could hear the fury barely contained beneath the surface. Your son, he said slowly, carefully, like he was testing the weight of each word. Your own son did this to you. Him and his wife Brittany. They wanted my money. They thought I was alone, that no one would help me. They don't know you exist, Robert. They don't know anything about us. Where exactly are you right now? County Justice Center. Processing room, they're transferring me to state prison in less than 15 minutes. They're not transferring you anywhere, Robert said, and his voice had transformed into something I'd never heard before, pure, cold command. Put Officer Miller back on the phone. I handed the phone to Frank, who pressed it to his ear like it might explode. Mr. Sterling, he said. Robert's voice was loud enough that I could hear it from where I sat. Listen to me very carefully. My wife is not getting on that transport. She's going to stay exactly where she is until I arrive with my legal team. Do you understand, sir? I don't have the authority to stop a scheduled transfer. There are protocols. I'm going to tell you something, Officer Miller. In exactly 5 minutes, Judge Hamilton Richards is going to receive an emergency call requesting a temporary suspension of the sentence based on procedural irregularities. In 10 minutes, you'll have a signed order stopping any transfer of prisoner Cecilia Dawson pending case review. And if anything happens to my wife before I get there, if anyone moves her 1 single inch from where she is right now, I will personally ensure that every person involved in this disaster loses not only their job, but faces legal consequences that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Have I made myself sufficiently clear? Frank had gone pale as milk. Yes, sir, crystal clear. Good, now put my wife back on the phone. I took the phone again, my hands still shaking. Robert, I don't know how to— Don't apologize. He cut me off, his voice softening. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it, but I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get you out of there. And your son, that piece of work who calls himself your family, is going to pay for every second of suffering he's caused you. He's still my son, I whispered, even though saying it hurt. He stopped being your son the moment he decided to betray you like this, Robert said, and there was finality in his voice. But don't worry about that now. Focus on staying safe. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't accept anything they offer you. My team will be there in less than an hour. Morris Flores, the best criminal defense attorney in the state, is already on his way. He's going to handle everything. And Frank, I asked, looking at the officer who had made this miracle possible. I promised him you would help his family. Officer Miller is going to receive everything you promised him and more, Robert said. After I finish sorting out this mess, he and his family will never have to worry about money again. You have my word on that. Frank, who had been listening, closed his eyes. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek, cutting a track through the lines of too many years of hard work and harder choices. I love you, I told Robert. Thank you for not giving up on me. I would never give up on you, he replied. We're family now, Cecilia, and family protects each other. Stay right there, I'm coming. The call ended. I handed the phone back to Frank, and we sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing what had just happened. 7 minutes later, the phone on Frank's desk rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then his expression transformed from cautious hope to absolute astonishment. Yes, sir, he said. Yes, I understand, immediately. He hung up and looked at me with something approaching awe. Judge Richards just issued a temporary stay of your transfer. You're to remain here until your legal representation arrives. He shook his head slowly. Mrs. Dawson, I don't know who you really are, but your husband just moved mountains in less than 10 minutes. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Robert Sterling doesn't do anything halfway. But even as relief flooded through me, even as the impossible started becoming possible, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Where was he right now? Probably at some expensive restaurant, celebrating with champagne, toasting his victory with Brittany. They were probably already making plans for my money, already dividing up the fortune they thought they'd stolen. They had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that the most powerful man in the state was about to unleash everything he had against them. They had no idea they'd made the biggest mistake of their lives. 40 minutes later, the processing room door burst open like someone had kicked it. A man strode in with the kind of presence that makes rooms feel smaller, tall, maybe 50 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His black hair was slicked back perfectly, his dark eyes sharp and intelligent, and he moved with the absolute confidence of someone who had never lost a case in his entire career. Morris Flores, he announced, extending his hand first to me, then to Frank. I'm Mrs. Dawson's attorney, and we're leaving here right now. Behind him came two assistants loaded down with briefcases and file boxes, and behind them, finally, came Robert. My Robert, he looked exactly as I remembered him. Distinguished silver hair, impeccable suit, those blue eyes that had first caught my attention at an art gallery 6 months ago, but there was something different now. An intensity, a barely controlled fury that made the air around him seem to vibrate with dangerous energy. Our eyes met across that dingy processing room, and he crossed the space in 3 long strides. He knelt in front of me, not caring that his $1,000 suit was touching that dirty floor, and took my cuffed hands in his. My love, he whispered, and his voice cracked. Forgive me for not being here when you needed me. You're here now, I said through my tears. That's all that matters. Robert stood and turned to Morris. I want those handcuffs off her immediately. I want every document reviewed. I want every irregularity exposed. And I want the name of every person involved in this conspiracy against my wife. Morris smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who just spotted wounded prey. We're already on it, Mr. Sterling. I guarantee that by this time tomorrow, your wife will be free and those responsible will be answering some very uncomfortable questions. Robert turned to Frank, who had stood up from his desk and was watching everything with an expression of complete amazement. Officer Miller, Robert said, walking toward him, my wife told me you made this call possible, that you risked your position to help her. I want you to know that will not be forgotten. Frank swallowed hard. She needed help, sir, that's all. You did more than help. You gave her hope when she had none, and I always pay my debts. Robert pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Henrik, it's me. I need you to prepare the house in Sun Valley Hills. Yes, the 4-bedroom with the large yard. It's going to be for the Miller family. I want the deed ready by tomorrow and make sure it's fully furnished and ready to move into immediately. Frank staggered. He had to grab his desk to keep from falling. Mr. Sterling, I can't, that's too much. It's not enough, Robert interrupted. But it's a start. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal activity that moved so fast I could barely keep track. Morris Flores worked like a man possessed, dissecting every piece of evidence in my case, finding irregularities that my previous court-appointed attorney had either missed or hadn't had the resources to investigate. It turned out Ethan had made mistakes, small ones, but in a fraud case, small mistakes are like tiny cracks in a dam. Once you find them, the whole structure starts to crumble. Dates that didn't line up, signatures that were slightly off, testimonies with inconsistencies that nobody had questioned, because who would expect a son to betray his own mother so thoroughly? Robert didn't take me home that night. That would have violated the terms of my temporary stay. Instead, he took me to a house, one of his properties on the outskirts of the city. It was a mansion, really, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and a wall high enough to ensure absolute privacy. There were security guards at every entrance, men in dark suits with earpieces who nodded respectfully as we passed. I'm not taking any chances. Robert explained as he showed me to a bedroom suite that was bigger than my entire first apartment. Once Ethan finds out what's happening, he might try something desperate. I want you protected. That first night in the mansion, after the lawyers had finally left and we were alone, Robert just held me. He didn't say much. He simply wrapped his arms around me and let me cry for the betrayal, for the lost relationship with my son, for the innocence I'd had about family bonds that I would never get back. You're not foolish, he said when I finally voiced those thoughts aloud. You're a mother who loved her son. There's nothing foolish about that. I still love him, I whispered against his chest. God help me, I still love him, and that kills me. I know, Robert said, pulling back so he could look into my eyes. And that's why we're going to do this the right way, not for revenge, although God knows it would be deserved, but for justice, for the truth, so everyone knows you did nothing wrong. The next morning, Morris arrived with news that made my blood run cold and my heart soar simultaneously. He'd found someone willing to talk. One of the witnesses who'd testified against me, an accountant named William Perry who claimed he'd reviewed my finances and found irregularities, was ready to tell the truth. Apparently, Ethan hadn't paid him the full amount he'd promised, and William was angry enough and scared enough about being implicated that he decided to come clean before the whole thing exploded. Morris brought him to the mansion that afternoon, along with a notary and recording equipment. We were going to document everything. William Perry was a nervous man in his 40s who looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. He couldn't meet my eyes as he sat down in the living room that Robert had converted into a makeshift legal war room. Mrs. Dawson, he began, his voice shaking. I didn't know it would go this far. You have to believe me. When Ethan hired me, he said he just needed some documents reviewed, some numbers adjusted for tax purposes. He paid me $5,000 up front and promised another $20,000 when everything was over. And what exactly did you do? Morris asked, his voice calm but with a dangerous edge. I fabricated financial reports, William admitted, tears starting to roll down his face. I created transactions that never existed. I made it look like Mrs. Dawson had been moving large sums of money from joint accounts with Ethan into personal accounts she'd hidden. But none of it was real. It was all created on my computer, fake transactions, fake account numbers, fake everything. And the withdrawals I supposedly made, I asked, tasting bile. The $150,000 the prosecutor said I stole from my own son, they never existed, William said, his voice breaking. Ethan gave me access to old bank accounts that were already closed. I altered the statements to show recent activity. I changed dates. I invented transaction numbers. Anyone with forensic accounting knowledge would have caught the fraud in minutes, but your lawyer never requested an independent audit. Because I couldn't afford one, I said bitterly. Ethan made sure to freeze my assets so quickly I barely had money for the public defender they assigned me. Morris was taking furious notes. Robert, who'd been listening from a corner of the room with his arms crossed, finally spoke. Was Brittany involved in this? Ethan's wife, William nodded vigorously. She was the one who initially contacted me. Ethan didn't even know my name at first. Brittany had been planning this for months, maybe years. She showed me documents, explained exactly what she needed me to do. It was her plan from the start. He just followed her orders. That revelation hit me harder than I'd expected. Part of me had wanted to believe that my son was also a victim here, that Brittany had manipulated him, poisoned his mind against me. But hearing that he'd actively participated, that he'd followed her orders so willingly, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Why are you confessing this now? Robert asked. Why risk it? Because Ethan threatened me, William said, his voice cracking. After the trial, when I went to collect the rest of my payment, he laughed in my face. He told me I'd never see that money. And then he told me that if I talked to anyone about what I'd done, he'd make sure I was the only one who ended up in prison. That he had documents implicating me as the mastermind behind everything, that he was just an innocent victim I'd tricked. And those documents probably exist, Morris said. Ethan's smarter than we gave him credit for. He created layers of protection for himself. But now we have this, Robert said, pointing to the camera that had recorded every word. We have his confession. We have proof of criminal conspiracy. And with this, we can start tearing down everything they built. William's confession was just the beginning. Over the next several days, Morris and his team worked around the clock, tracking every move Ethan and Brittany had made in the past 6 months. They discovered bank accounts opened immediately after my arrest, large transfers scheduled to execute the day after I was supposed to be sent to prison. They'd even contacted a real estate agent about selling my house, the place where I'd raised Ethan, where his father had died, where every corner held memories of 30 years of family life. And they were going to sell it without a second thought. But what destroyed me completely was what we discovered a week after my temporary release. It turned out Ethan had a son from a previous marriage, an 8-year-old boy named Matthew who lived with his mother in another city. A grandson I never knew existed, and Brittany had been feeding that child lies about me. She told Matthew that his grandmother was a criminal, a thief, a bad woman who tried to steal his father's money. That because of me, his dad couldn't send them as much money as before, that I was the reason he couldn't have the things he wanted. We found out because Matthew's mother, a woman named Tatiana Reynolds, contacted us directly. She'd seen the news coverage, yes, by this point the press had gotten hold of the story. Robert Sterling's wife unjustly imprisoned by her own son was the kind of scandal that sold newspapers. Tatiana came to see us, bringing Matthew with her. He was a beautiful child with Ethan's eyes but a sweetness in his face that my son had lost somewhere along the way. When Matthew saw me, he hid behind his mother, frightened, as if I were some kind of monster. "I'm so sorry," Tatiana said, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know Brittany was telling him those things. Ethan barely visits us, and when he does, she's always with him, controlling every conversation. I thought she was just being protective, but now I understand she was manipulating everything." I knelt in front of Matthew, keeping my distance so I wouldn't scare him more. "Hello, Matthew," I said softly. "My name is Cecilia. I'm your grandmother. I know they told you bad things about me, but none of it is true. I would never hurt your father. I love him, even now, even after everything." Matthew looked at me with those big, innocent eyes. "You're not bad." "No, sweetheart, I'm not." "Then why does Dad say you are?" I didn't have an answer for that. How do you explain to an 8-year-old child that his father is a liar? That his father conspired to send his own mother to prison for money? "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I finally said. "Big mistakes, and your dad made a very big one. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." Matthew nodded slowly, still unsure but less frightened. Tatiana put her hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "Ethan never told me you were so kind. He never talked about you at all, actually. I understand why now." That night, after Tatiana and Matthew left, I sat with Robert in the mansion's garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful, completely at odds with the storm brewing inside me. "You have a grandson," Robert said softly. "A grandson you didn't even know existed." "Ethan hid him from me for years," I replied, feeling a fresh wave of betrayal wash over me. "I have a grandson, and he decided I didn't deserve to know him." "What kind of person does that?" "The kind of person who's capable of sending his mother to prison for money," Robert said, taking my hand. "But now you know him. And if Tatiana agrees, you can be part of Matthew's life. You can be the grandmother he deserves." "After we finish with this," I said, feeling something harden inside me. "After Ethan and Brittany pay for what they did, then I can think about being a grandmother." Robert smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a man who knew justice was near. "Speaking of that," he said, "Morris has news. The prosecutor reviewed the new evidence. They're dropping all charges against you tomorrow in a special hearing, and they're issuing arrest warrants for Ethan, Brittany, and William for conspiracy, fraud, and perjury." I gasped. Tomorrow," Robert confirmed, "but there's something else. It turns out Ethan organized an event for tomorrow night, a celebration at a private club. He invited friends, family, business partners. He was planning to officially announce that he'd inherited your fortune, that he was ready to invest in new ventures. Basically, he was going to celebrate his victory over you in front of everyone. The irony was almost too perfect. "What are you thinking?" I asked, seeing the calculating expression on Robert's face. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that it would be a shame if he missed his own celebration party." The hearing the next day was swift and devastatingly effective. Judge Richards, the same one who'd presided over my original trial, looked visibly uncomfortable as he reviewed the new evidence Morris presented. William Perry's recorded confession, the forensic analyses of the falsified documents, the inconsistencies in the testimonies that nobody had questioned because they seemed too elaborate to be lies. The prosecutor, Henry Flores, Morris's younger brother, stood and formally declared that the state was dropping all charges against Cecilia Dawson, that there had been a monumental miscarriage of justice, that they'd been fooled by a meticulously planned criminal conspiracy. "Mrs. Dawson," Judge Richards said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something close to respect in a judge's voice. "On behalf of this court, I offer my sincerest apologies. What was done to you is inexcusable, and I assure you that those responsible will face the full weight of the law." I couldn't speak. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but these were different tears, tears of relief, of vindication, of justice finally being served. "Arrest warrants are hereby issued for Ethan Dawson, Brittany Dawson, and William Perry on charges of criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury," the judge continued. "Officers are authorized to proceed immediately." Robert, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand. Morris closed his briefcase with a satisfying click. We'd won the first battle, but the war wasn't over yet. Because winning in court was one thing. Making Ethan and Brittany understand what they'd lost, that was something else entirely. We left the courthouse surrounded by security. Reporters swarmed us, shouting questions, pushing microphones toward my face. Robert shielded me with his body as we made our way to the waiting car. I didn't say anything to the press, not yet. There would be time for public statements later. For now, I just wanted to breathe. I just wanted to process that I was finally free. Back at the mansion, Robert led me to the master suite. He'd bought me new clothes, elegant dresses in my exact size, comfortable but beautiful shoes, everything a woman would need to feel human again after weeks of humiliation. He'd prepared a bath with aromatic salts, candles, soft music playing in the background. Rest, he told me, kissing my forehead. You need to be ready for tonight, Ethan's celebration. The event where he planned to boast about his victory, about the fortune he'd stolen, about the bright future he thought awaited him. He had no idea that arrest warrants with his name were being processed at that very moment. That police officers were preparing to execute them. That his perfect world was about to crumble in front of everyone he knew. Robert had arranged it so the arrests wouldn't happen until after the event started. He wanted Ethan to have his moment of imagined glory. He wanted him to celebrate, to toast, to feel invincible. Because the fall would be so much harder from that height, and I was going to be there to watch it happen. I sank into that hot bath, letting the water relax muscles I'd kept tensed for too long. I closed my eyes and thought about everything that had led to this moment. How a 70-year-old woman who'd lost everything had discovered she had more strength than she'd ever imagined, more resources, more allies, and a husband who would move heaven and earth to protect her. After the bath, I found a dress laid out on the bed, deep burgundy, long-sleeved, falling just below my knees. Elegant but age-appropriate, perfect. It came with a simple pearl necklace and low-heeled shoes I could wear for hours without pain. I dressed slowly, carefully, applied makeup to cover the marks these weeks had left, the dark circles, the pallor, the stress lines that had aged my face more than any calendar year ever could. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the broken prisoner from a week ago. This was Cecilia Sterling, wife of one of the most powerful men in the state, a woman who'd faced betrayal and survived. A woman ready for battle. Robert entered, already dressed in an impeccable suit. When he saw me, he stopped. You're beautiful, he said, genuine wonder in his voice. Absolutely beautiful. I feel like a warrior preparing for battle, I admitted. Well, Robert smiled, offering me his arm. That's exactly what you are. The private club where Ethan had organized his celebration was in the heart of the city, one of those exclusive places where you needed connections just to get a reservation. Robert was a founding member. He'd invested in the place when it opened a decade ago. We arrived just as the event was reaching its peak. Cars lined up at the entrance, valets rushing back and forth. Well-dressed people coming and going, laughing, drinking champagne before they even entered the building. Robert instructed our driver to park where we could see the entrance but not be easily seen. He wanted to know exactly who was inside before we made our entrance. He wanted the perfect moment. Are you sure about this? Robert asked one more time. We can still leave. Let the police handle everything. You don't have to face him this way. I looked toward the building, toward those bright lights, toward the laughter echoing even from here. Somewhere inside was Ethan, my son, the child I'd carried and raised and loved. The man who'd betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. I need to do this, I said firmly. I need him to see me. I need him to know he didn't win, that he was never going to win. Robert nodded and sent a quick text. Seconds later, he received a reply. Morris is inside, he reported. Says Ethan's in the center of everything, showing off. Brittany's by his side wearing a dress that probably cost what most people earn in a month. They're serving $500 a bottle champagne. Your money, of course. Of course, my money paying for their fake celebration. There's more, Robert continued, reading another message. Ethan just made an announcement. Says he's launching a new investment firm, that he has $2 million in seed capital and is looking for partners. $2 million. I didn't even have that much in liquid assets. Which meant he was lying again, making promises he couldn't keep, deceiving more people. It's time, I said, opening the car door. We walked toward the entrance together, my arm linked through Robert's. The valet's eyes widened in recognition. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, good evening. We didn't know you were attending this event. It's a surprise, Robert said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We prefer it to remain that way for the moment. The valet nodded quickly and opened the door. The music hit us first, followed by laughter, overlapping conversations, the clinking of glasses. The ballroom was huge, decorated with excessive elegance. Lights hung from the ceiling, tables covered in immaculate white cloths, a full bar on one side and a dance floor on the other. And in the center of everything, surrounded by people, was Ethan. My son looked different from the last time I'd seen him in court. New suit, clearly expensive, hair perfectly styled. He held a champagne glass and gestured animatedly while telling some story that made everyone around him laugh. Brittany clung to his side in a bright red dress, tight-fitting, cut low. Jewelry hung from her neck and wrists, probably also bought with my money. She smiled with that satisfied look she'd perfected. We stood at the entrance, observing. Nobody had noticed us yet. All attention was focused on Ethan, on his celebration, on his moment of glory. Morris appeared beside us. "Everything's ready," he whispered. "Police are outside waiting for the signal. The moment you say the word, they come in and make the arrests." "Not yet," I replied. "I want him to see me first." Robert guided me further into the room. Some guests began to notice our presence. I saw their expressions change from confusion to recognition to absolute shock. Whispers began spreading like wildfire. "Robert Sterling is here, and the woman next to him, the woman who is supposed to be in prison, is also here." The murmuring grew louder. More people turned to look. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Finally, inevitably, Ethan felt the change in atmosphere. He stopped talking and looked around, trying to understand what had captured everyone's attention. His eyes met mine across the room. I saw the exact moment his brain processed what he was seeing. The color drained from his face. The champagne glass nearly slipped from his hand. His mouth opened in shock. Brittany followed his gaze, and when she saw me, her face transformed into a mask of pure horror. The music was still playing, but now nobody was dancing. Everyone was looking at us, at me, standing at the entrance in my elegant dress, at Robert by my side, and at Ethan and Brittany in the center looking like they'd just seen a ghost. Because to them, that's exactly what I was. A ghost from a past they'd tried to bury. A woman who was supposed to be locked away, defeated, destroyed. Instead, here I was, free, powerful, and accompanied by the most influential man in the state. I started walking toward them. Robert stayed by my side. Morris followed a few steps behind. The crowd parted as we walked, creating a path directly to the center of the room, directly to my son and his wife. Each step was a declaration. Each step said, "I survived." Each step said, "You didn't win." Each step said, "Now it's your turn to fall." We finally arrived in front of them. Ethan opened his mouth, tried to say something, but no sound came out. Brittany looked at him desperately, hoping he'd fix this somehow, that he'd find the magic words to make this nightmare disappear. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the music had stopped. "Hello, Ethan," I finally said, my voice calm, controlled, stronger than I'd felt in years. "What a lovely celebration. Too bad it won't end the way you expected." Ethan found his voice, though it came out trembling. "Mom, what are you doing here? You were supposed to, you shouldn't, be in prison." I finished for him. "Yes, I know. I was supposed to be locked up for 3 years while you and your charming wife enjoyed my money. While you celebrated your victory, while you erased me from your lives as if I'd never existed." Brittany tried to regain her composure, straightening her shoulders, lifting her chin. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is a private event. You weren't invited. You should leave before we call security." Robert let out a short, humorless laugh. "Security? Please try it. This club is 40% owned by me. The security here answers to me before anyone else." Brittany's face paled further. Her eyes darted around, looking for an exit. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan demanded, looking at Robert with fear and defiance. "What do you have to do with any of this?" "I am Robert Sterling," my husband said, and I saw recognition hit Ethan like a physical blow. "And I'm your mother's husband, the man you never bothered to ask about. The man whose existence would have made you reconsider every one of your stupid plans." The murmurs in the room turned into audible exclamations. Everyone knew Robert Sterling's name. Everyone knew what that meant. And now everyone understood that Ethan Dawson had made the biggest mistake of his life. "It's not possible," Ethan whispered. "You're not married. You never said anything." "You're right," I interrupted. "I didn't tell you. Because you barely visited me, Ethan. Because when you did, you only came to ask for money. Because you stopped being my son long before you decided to send me to prison." Morris stepped forward, taking out his phone. "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, I should inform you that this morning in a special hearing, all charges against Cecilia Dawson were dropped. Judge Richards issued arrest warrants against both of you and William Perry for criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury." Brittany gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Ethan staggered, grabbing the table behind him to keep from falling. "That's ridiculous," he managed. They don't have proof. We have William Perry's full confession," Morris continued. "Video recorded under oath with a notary present. He explained in detail how you hired him to falsify financial documents, how you created non-existent transactions, how you manipulated everything to incriminate an innocent woman." "He's lying," Brittany screamed, her composure finally crumbling. He's framing us to save himself. We also have forensic analysis, Morris added calmly. Experts examined every document presented in the original trial. They discovered digital alterations, manipulated dates, forged signatures. We have technical evidence that cannot be refuted. Ethan began backing away, dragging Brittany with him, his eyes desperately searching for exits. But Robert had been thorough. Security guards blocked every door. And there's more, I continued, taking a step closer to my son. We discovered the bank accounts you opened immediately after my arrest. We saw the scheduled transfers. We found the emails with the real estate agent about selling my house. We have every piece of evidence showing exactly what you planned to do once I was out of the way. We also spoke with Tatiana, Robert added, Matthew's mother. Your son, Ethan, the grandson you hid from your mother for years. She told us how Brittany's been filling that boy's head with lies about Cecilia. How could you? I asked, my voice finally breaking. How could you do all this? I'm your mother. I gave you everything. I sacrificed everything for you after your father died. I worked 2 jobs so you could go to a good school. I stayed up all night when you were sick. I defended you when no one else would. And this is how you repay me, destroying my life for money you didn't even desperately need. You were always controlling. Ethan spat out suddenly, his fear transforming into defensive rage. Always wanting to know everything, control everything. You never let me live my own life. This money was mine by right. I'm your only son. It should have been mine from the start. Then you should have asked for it like a civilized adult, Robert said coldly, instead of conspiring like a cowardly criminal. Morris lifted his phone and typed a quick message. Seconds later, the ballroom doors opened. Police officers entered, moving with purpose toward the center of the room, toward where Ethan and Brittany were trapped. Ethan Dawson, Brittany Dawson, one of the officers announced, you are under arrest on charges of criminal conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. The rest was lost in the chaos that erupted. Brittany began screaming, trying to pull away as officers moved to handcuff her. Ethan simply stood there, motionless, as if his brain had finally accepted that this was real, that there was no escape. The guests watched in horror and fascination. Some pulled out phones, recording everything. This would be on the news within minutes, all over social media. The public, humiliating fall of Ethan Dawson, the man who tried to destroy his own mother. As the officers dragged them toward the exit, Ethan looked at me one last time. I searched his eyes for remorse, for some sign that the son I'd known was still in there somewhere. But all I saw was hatred, pure, undiluted hatred. And in that moment, I understood that the son I'd loved had died long ago. The man in front of me was a stranger who shared my blood but none of my values. Goodbye, Ethan, I whispered as he disappeared through the doors. The days after the arrest were a media storm I hadn't anticipated. My face was on every newspaper, every news broadcast. The story had everything the press loves: family betrayal, dramatic reversal, a clear villain, and a victim who became a victor. But what the reporters didn't know was that this was far from over. 3 days after Ethan and Brittany were arrested, Morris arrived at the mansion with news that made my blood run cold. He'd discovered something else while reviewing documents, something none of us had anticipated. Mrs. Sterling, he said, spreading papers across the dining room table, we found something that completely changes the situation. Robert and I leaned in to look. They were property deeds, legal documents filled with jargon I could barely understand, but there was one address I recognized immediately: my house, the house where I'd lived for 30 years. What is this? I asked, feeling dread pool in my stomach. Ethan didn't just plan to sell your house after you went to prison, Morris explained. He already sold it, well, technically transferred it into Brittany's name. 2 weeks ago, before the final trial, he forged your signature on property transfer documents. The house is legally no longer yours. The room seemed to spin. How is that possible? He bribed a corrupt notary, Morris replied. Ramona Perry Williams' sister. She authenticated the false signature, dated everything correctly, made it all look completely legal. My house, I whispered. The house where I raised Ethan, where my husband died, where I have 30 years of memories. There's more, Morris continued grimly. Brittany already put the house up for sale. She has an interested buyer willing to pay $800,000. The closing is scheduled for next week. That can't be legal, Robert said. She's arrested. She can't complete a real estate transaction from jail. She posted bail this morning, Morris informed us. $500,000. We don't know where she got the money, but she's out. Where did Brittany get $500,000? I asked. Morris exchanged a look with Robert. We believe she has an accomplice we haven't identified yet. Someone with significant resources who's helping her from the shadows. The idea that there was someone else involved, someone still helping Brittany even after everything had been exposed, filled me with fear. I need to get my house back, I said firmly. They can't keep it. We're already working on it, Morris assured me. We filed an emergency lawsuit this morning to nullify the property transfer based on forgery. But legal processes take time, and in the meantime, Brittany is technically the legal owner. She can sell it before we manage to stop her. Then we'll stop her another way, Robert said, pulling out his phone. Over the next several hours, Robert made calls. He contacted judges, lawyers, private investigators. It was like watching a chess master move pieces on a board I could barely comprehend. That evening, Morris returned with a team of investigators. They'd been following Brittany since she was released on bail. What they discovered was worse than we'd imagined. She went directly to her home, reported one investigator, Frank, the same correctional officer who'd helped me. But she wasn't alone. There was a man waiting for her. We identified him as Richard Reynolds, Tatiana's ex-husband, Matthew's father. The man who abandoned his family? Robert asked, disgust in his voice. He never actually left, Frank explained. We've been tracking his finances. He has an offshore account with over $3 million, money from illegal businesses over the last 5 years. And it turns out he met Brittany 2 years ago, long before she married Ethan. She saw an opportunity in your family, seduced Ethan specifically to get close to your money. The room fell silent as we processed this. Brittany had been planning this for years. Everything had been calculated, meticulous, malicious from the start. Then Ethan was also a victim, I murmured, feeling a strange mixture of rage and pity. That doesn't excuse him, Robert said firmly. He chose to go along with it. He chose to betray you. There's more, Frank continued. We overheard part of their conversation. Brittany and Richard are planning to flee the country. They have tickets for tomorrow night to Brazil. They plan to sell the house quickly, take the money, and disappear. Not if we stop them first, Robert said. The operation was put into motion with efficiency that left me astonished. Within hours, we had 24-hour surveillance on my house, court orders being processed, alerts at every airport and border crossing. But I wanted more. It wasn't enough to stop them legally. I needed to face them. I needed them to know I'd discovered everything. I want to go there, I told Robert that night, to my house. I want to see it one last time before this ends. Robert looked at me with concern. It's dangerous. Let her know I'm there, I interrupted. I want to look her in the eye and tell her exactly what I think of her. Robert sighed but understood. Then we go together. But with complete security. We arrived at my house at dusk. The place that had been my home for 30 years looked different now, almost alien. Lights were on inside. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. Brittany was inside, probably packing for her planned escape. Robert had brought security, 2 cars with guards following at a safe distance. Frank was in one of them. We had constant communication with Morris. Are you sure about this? Robert asked one more time. I'm sure, I replied, even though my heart was pounding. I used my key, wondering if Brittany had been careless enough not to change the locks. The door opened. We entered, and the familiar scent of my home hit me with a wave of nostalgia so strong I had to stop. But something was wrong. The house was almost empty. The furniture I'd bought so carefully over the years, the photographs on the walls, the memories of a lifetime, everything was gone. My God, I whispered, they took everything. We continued on, passing through rooms that had been systematically stripped. My bedroom was completely empty. They'd even taken the curtains. Voices came from the kitchen. One was Brittany. The other was male Richard Reynolds. We approached quietly, staying out of sight as we listened. Are you sure the buyer is going to close tomorrow? Richard was asking. She confirmed this morning, Brittany replied, satisfaction in her voice. $800,000 transferred directly to my offshore account. By this time tomorrow, we'll be on the plane with over $2 million. And Ethan? Richard asked. Brittany let out a cruel laugh. Ethan was useful as long as I needed him, but he was too weak, too emotional. No, it's better to leave him behind. Let him rot in prison thinking his wife abandoned him. I'd heard enough. I walked into the kitchen with Robert right behind me. Brittany was standing by the table surrounded by boxes. Richard was on the other side, a large man who looked at me with surprise. Hello, Brittany, I said, keeping my voice firm. Interesting conversation. Brittany's face transformed from surprise to terror. She dropped the box she was holding, its contents scattering across the floor. My antique jewelry box, framed photographs, small treasures I'd collected over the years. How did you get in here? She demanded. This is my house now. You're trespassing. Your house, I repeated bitterly, based on forged documents and a corrupt notary. Did you really think you'd get away with it? Richard took a step forward, his posture threatening. You should leave now before this gets ugly. Robert moved to partially block me, his voice cold as ice. I suggest you stay exactly where you are, Mr. Reynolds. We have security personnel surrounding this house, and they're all waiting for my signal. Frank appeared at the back door, followed by 2 guards. Richard looked around, calculating his options, and apparently decided he had none. We also have your tickets to Brazil, I continued, showing my phone screen with their flight confirmations, and your offshore accounts. The $3 million you thought no one could track, everything's being frozen right now by court order. Brittany's color drained. You can't prove any of this. We have audio recordings of your conversation from 5 minutes ago, Robert said. Where you admitted to stealing $2 million and planning to flee the country, where you admitted to using Ethan and planning to abandon him in prison. Furthermore, I added, Ramona Perry, the notary you bribed, has already confessed everything. We have documents, bank transfers, text messages, everything is documented. Brittany slumped into a chair, all arrogance evaporating. Why? I asked. Why did you do all this? Was it really worth destroying a family, ruining lives, all for money? Brittany looked at me with empty eyes. Because people like you have everything effortlessly. Nice house, money saved, respect. While the rest of us have to fight for every penny, I saw an opportunity and I took it. No, I said firmly. I worked for everything I have, years of sacrifice, saving every dollar. You just wanted to steal what you didn't earn. Sirens began to sound outside. Morris had requested police once we confirmed we had enough evidence. Officers entered moments later with updated arrest warrants for Brittany and a new one for Richard on conspiracy and money laundering charges. As they handcuffed them, Brittany looked at me one last time. Ethan really hated you, you know, she spat with venom. I didn't have to convince him of much. Her words hurt, but they no longer had the power to destroy me. Goodbye, Brittany, I said. I hope the money was worth it. When they were gone, I stood in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my plundered life, and finally allowed the tears to flow. Robert held me while I cried for everything I'd lost, for the family I'd never have again, for the son who was now lost forever. But I also cried with relief, because it was finally over. 6 months later, I stood in the garden of my completely restored house. Robert had insisted on hiring the best restorers to return my home to its original glory. Every piece of furniture had been replaced by something even more beautiful. The walls had been repainted, the floors polished until they shone, but the most important thing was who was with me in that garden. Matthew was running between the flowers I'd planted especially for him, his laughter filling the air with music I didn't know how much I'd needed to hear. Tatiana sat on a patio chair watching her son with a peaceful smile. She'd finally found stability, a good job, and most importantly, she'd completely removed Matthew from his father's toxic influence. Because Richard Reynolds was in prison, sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. Brittany was serving 12 years in federal prison, all her assets confiscated, all her accounts emptied to pay restitution. And Ethan, my son, was serving 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. The judge had been more lenient with him, recognizing he'd been manipulated to some extent by Brittany, but he still had to pay for his actions. I tried to visit him in prison once, 2 months after his conviction. I thought maybe we could start some kind of healing process, but when I saw his face through the glass, all I found was bitterness and resentment. You came to gloat, he'd said through the phone. To show me how well you're doing while I rot here. I came to see if there was still anything left of the son I raised, I replied calmly, but I see there isn't. That son died when you decided to marry your millionaire and keep it a secret, he spat. None of this would have happened if you hadn't decided to rob me and send me to prison, I corrected him. You made those decisions, Ethan, no one else. He didn't respond, just looked at me with pure hatred. And in that moment, I understood there was no redemption here, no forgiveness or reconciliation. I got up to leave, but before hanging up, I said one last thing. Despite everything, I wish you peace, Ethan. I hope one day you find a way to forgive yourself, because I've already forgiven you, not for you, but for me, so I can move on without carrying this weight. I didn't wait for his response, I just left. And I hadn't been back since. But today, in this garden full of life and light, with my grandson laughing and my new family around me, I finally felt I'd closed that painful chapter. Robert came out carrying a tray with fresh lemonade and cookies we'd baked together that morning. Grandma, look what I found, Matthew shouted, running toward me with a ladybug in his small hand. Ladybugs need to be free, honey, I told him, kneeling to his level. But you can watch her for a moment and then let her go so she can return to her family. Matthew nodded seriously, studying the insect with fascination. Tatiana came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. Thank you for everything you've done for us. Not just the financial support, but for giving Matthew a real grandmother. Someone who loves him unconditionally. The pleasure is entirely mine, I replied sincerely. Matthew has given me a purpose I didn't know I needed. Robert sat next to me on the garden bench, putting his arm around my shoulders. What are you thinking about? He asked. How strange life is. 6 months ago, I was in a processing room, handcuffed, believing my life was over. And now I'm here, surrounded by people who truly love me, in a house that's truly mine, with a future I never imagined possible. And with a husband who would do anything for you," Robert added with a smile. Yes, I smiled back, with a husband who moved heaven and earth to save me. Frank Miller, the correctional officer who'd made all this possible, was also thriving. Robert had kept his promise. Frank and his family now lived in a beautiful house in Sun Valley Hills, completely paid off. His wife had received the medical treatment she needed. His daughter had gotten a good job at one of Robert's companies. His grandchildren had their own rooms for the first time in their lives. Frank came to visit occasionally, always shy, always grateful. "I just made a call," he always said. "You did more than that, Frank," I replied. "You gave me hope when I had none, and that is priceless." As the sun began to set over the garden, Matthew finally released his ladybug and ran to sit on my lap. Robert took my hand. Tatiana started preparing dinner in the kitchen, and for the first time in what seemed like decades, I felt something I'd forgotten existed: complete peace. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I married Robert a year ago. It wasn't the family I'd dreamed of when Ethan was a baby in my arms, but it was my family now. A family built not by blood, but by choice, by kindness, by genuine love. And as I looked around this garden full of life, at this restored home, at these people who'd chosen me as much as I'd chosen them, I understood something fundamental. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to find happiness. And it's never too late to learn that true family isn't who shares your blood, but who chooses to stay by your side when everything falls apart. I am 70 years old. I've survived widowhood, betrayal, unjust incarceration, and the loss of my only son. But I've also found love again, met my grandson, and built a life worth living. And if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that women my age, women who have survived decades of life, who have faced loss and betrayal and pain, are stronger than anyone imagines. We deserve respect. We deserve dignity. And above all, we deserve justice. And when someone tries to take that away from us, we have every right to fight with every ounce of strength we have, because we're never too old to defend ourselves. We're never too weak to demand what's ours. And we're never, ever invisible, no matter how much the world tries to make us believe otherwise. This is my story, and it has a happy ending, not because everything was resolved perfectly, but because I finally learned that I deserve to be happy. And that perhaps is the most important lesson of all. Sitting here telling you this story, I realized something profound. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Love does. Showing up when someone needs you most does. I thought I'd lost everything when those handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists. I thought my son's betrayal had destroyed me. But what I actually lost was an illusion, the illusion that family bonds are unbreakable just because they're written in DNA. What I gained was something far more valuable. I gained people who chose to stand by me. Frank, who risked his position to make one phone call. Robert, who moved mountains to save me. Morris, who fought for justice. Tatiana, who trusted me with her son. And Matthew, my precious grandson, who gave me a reason to keep fighting when I thought I had nothing left. The greatest takeaway from this nightmare isn't just about justice or vindication. It's about the immense value of speaking up for yourself, even when your voice is shaking. That moment when I slipped that note onto Frank's desk, I stopped being a passive victim and became the architect of my own rescue. I learned that genuine family is intentionally constructed in the fires of mutual respect, not merely inherited by chance. I learned that forgiveness, even when the offender is unrepentant, is solely for the benefit of the person offering it. It's about releasing the emotional chains that bind you to past pain. And I learned that your life is defined by the quality of relationships you choose to cultivate, not the ones that abandoned you. If you're watching this and you've faced betrayal, whether from family, friends, or people you trusted, I want you to know something. You're stronger than you think. You have more resources than you realize. And it's never, ever too late to fight for yourself. Don't let anyone make you invisible. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too tired, too broken to demand justice. Don't let anyone steal your voice. And remember this: when everything falls apart, when the people you trusted most become the ones who hurt you deepest, that's when you discover who you really are. That's when you find out what you're made of. I'm 70 years old, and I'm here to tell you I'm made of steel. So are you. Share your story with us, because your voice matters, your story matters. And somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know they're not alone. Someone needs to understand that survival isn't just possible, it's powerful. Thank you for listening to mine.